2:15 in the morning, Udeid Air Base, Qatar. A ballistic missile launched from the Iranian coast impacted the center of a United States Patriot missile battery. The defense system did not fire. In the span of 6 seconds, the regional balance of power was shattered by a single kinetic strike. 14 American service members were killed instantly in the fireball. The question was no longer if the system worked. It was why it had chosen to remain silent. The desert air was heavy and still. At Udeid, the hum of massive generators usually provided a constant backdrop to the night. That hum was silenced by a thunderous crack that rolled across the dunes. A column of fire rose 300 feet into the air. It illuminated the rows of tanker aircraft and transports parked on the distant tarmac. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere shifted from routine to catastrophe in a heartbeat. Glowing green monitors showed a clear sky. There were no incoming tracks. There were no warnings from the early warning satellites. The screen was a lie. Colonel Sarah Vance stood at the center of the room. She felt the floor vibrate beneath her boots. She looked at the primary air defense console. The operator was staring at the glass with his mouth open. The colonel shouted to be heard over the rising sirens. "Status on Battery 3. Now." The operator's voice was thin. "Battery 3 is offline, ma'am. I have no signal. I have no telemetry." "Check the link," Vance commanded. "Restart the diagnostic." "There is nothing to check, Colonel. The site is gone." 2:17 in the morning. The base fire department was already moving. Red lights cut through the thick black smoke. The smell of burning propellant and melted copper filled the air. This was the most protected square mile of airspace on the planet. Billions of dollars had been spent to ensure this specific event could never happen. Yet, the twisted metal of the launcher was visible in the flickering light of the fire. Military police established a perimeter around the blast zone. They moved with a sense of practiced urgency, but there was a layer of shock beneath their movements. They were trained for a war that involved thousands of missiles. They were not prepared for a single, perfect strike that bypassed every layer of their technology. The radio in the command center crackled to life. It was the first report from the ground team. The medic spoke into the radio. "Command, this is Medic 1. We are at the site." Colonel Vance leaned over the console. "Report, Medic 1. We have heavy casualties. I count 14 down. There are no survivors at the primary control station." Vance closed her eyes for a single second. 14. In the history of the base, they had never lost a single person to enemy fire. Now, a quarter of a platoon was gone. "Confirm," Vance said. "Are you seeing any unexploded ordnance?" The medic responded, "Negative." It was a direct hit. The warhead functioned as intended. There is a crater 12 feet deep where the radar van used to be. 2:20 in the morning. The news reached the Pentagon in seconds. It reached the White House in minutes. On the other side of the Persian Gulf, the Iranian controllers watched their own monitors. They saw the successful impact. They saw the lack of a response. The world waited for the counterattack. The tankers were fueled. The strike packages were ready. The pilots sat in their cockpits, waiting for the words that would begin a war. But as the minutes ticked by, the radios remained silent. The expected orders did not come. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:21 in the morning. Udeid Air Base. The fire at the Patriot battery site burned with a fierce chemical intensity. Thick plumes of white smoke drifted across the runway, obscuring the vision of the first responders. Colonel Vance watched the live feed from a remote camera. The image was grainy and shaken. It showed the blackened remains of the radar array, tipped over like a dead giant. The primary task was no longer defense. It was recovery. Vance turned back to her staff. "I want a full sweep of the network. Every server, every data link. If that missile reached us without a single sensor alarm, then we are flying blind. We need to know if the enemy is still in our systems. We need to know if the enemy is still in our systems." The lead technical officer looked up. His face was pale under the blue light of the monitors. "Colonel, I have already run 3 diagnostics. The system shows green. According to the software, that missile never existed. 14 people are dead," Vance said. Her voice was a low, dangerous rasp. The missile existed. Find out how it became a ghost. 2:25 in the morning. Bandar Abbas, Iran. Inside a reinforced concrete bunker carved into the coastal cliffs, the mood was not one of celebration. It was one of profound, paralyzing fear. Major Reza Karimi stood behind the launch console. He was a professional officer with 12 years of experience in the missile forces. He had not given the order to fire. His fingers were nowhere near the launch key. Yet, the screen in front of him showed that a single Shahab-3 missile had left its silo 4 minutes ago. His commander, General Afshar, entered the room. The general's face was a mask of fury and confusion. The general shouted, "Who authorized the release? Who gave the command?" Major Karimi stood at attention. His hands were trembling. "General, no one gave the command. The sequence initiated itself. The sequence initiated itself. We tried to abort. The system locked us out." The general looked at the tracking data. The impact was confirmed. Al-Udeid, the heart of American power in the region. "We have just started a war," the general whispered. "A war we did not intend to fight." 2:32 in the morning. The American carrier strike group in the North Arabian Sea received the flash message. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the admiral did not hesitate. The ship began to turn. The massive four-bladed propellers churned the water into a boiling wake. The air boss spoke over the internal circuit. "Launch the alert fighters. Get the Hawkeye airborne. I want a full picture of the Iranian coast within 10 minutes." The deck of the carrier became a hive of controlled chaos. Yellow-shirted sailors directed the F-18 Hornets toward the catapults. The roar of the engines drowned out all other sound. The pilots were being briefed via data link while they were still taxiing. They were told there had been an attack. They were told there were casualties. Inside the cockpit of the lead fighter, Commander Cutter Jackson finished his pre-flight checks. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had flown hundreds of missions over this water. Usually, it was a game of cat and mouse. Today, the cat had been bitten. The catapult fired. The jet was flung into the darkness at 160 miles per hour. 2:40 in the morning. Back at Al-Udeid, the first bodies were being recovered from the debris. The medical teams worked in silence. They did not need to speak. The damage was total. Colonel Vance received a secure call from Central Command. The voice on the other end was cold. It was the voice of a man who was already looking at a target list. The general spoke. "Colonel, we are seeing heavy activity at the Iranian launch sites. Their mobile units are moving. Our carriers are in position. Give me a reason not to level their coastal defenses." Vance looked at the empty radar screen. She looked at the diagnostics that still showed a perfect, peaceful sky. "General," Vance said, "something is wrong. Our systems failed to see the attack." But the Iranians are not shouting about a victory. Their state media is silent. Their radio traffic is panicked. They are not acting like victors. They are acting like they are waiting for the end of the world. A long pause followed. The sound of static filled the line. "The president wants blood, Colonel. 14 Americans are gone. If you have a doubt, you had better find a way to prove it. You have 20 minutes before the first strikes are authorized." Vance hung up the phone. She looked at her team. "Find the ghost," she ordered. Now, 2:45 in the morning. The Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. The lights in the National Military Command Center were dimmed to reduce eye strain, but the energy in the room was electric. High-resolution satellite imagery was splashed across the main wall. It showed the Iranian coastline. Analysts were looking for movement. They found it. At 3 separate locations near the Strait of Hormuz, mobile missile launchers were being pulled out of their underground bunkers. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff looked at the display. He spoke into his headset. "Give me the status of the Global Strike Command." The duty officer replied. B-52 bombers are taxiing at Diego Garcia. They are carrying a full load of cruise missiles. They will be in range of their launch points in 4 hours. "What about the cyber assessment?" the chairman asked. "The National Security Agency is reporting a strange signature in the regional data stream. It is not an attack we recognize. It looks like white noise, but it is structured. It is sitting on top of the military frequencies used by both sides. 3 o'clock in the morning. Bandar Abbas, Iran. General Afshar stood in the center of the missile bunker. He was a man trapped between two fires. If he did nothing, the Americans would destroy his country in retaliation for a strike he did not order. If he prepared to defend himself, the Americans would see the movement as a sign of further aggression. He turned to his communications officer. "Get me the Supreme Command in Tehran. I need authorization to use the emergency back channel to the Americans. We have to tell them we did not fire." The officer worked the console with frantic speed. He shook his head. "Sir, the satellite link is down. The landlines are dead. We are isolated. Use the radio," Afshar ordered. "Broadcast on the international distress frequency. Tell them the launch was a technical error. Broadcast on the international distress frequency. Tell them the launch was a technical error." "I am trying, General, but the frequency is blocked. Someone is broadcasting high-power interference across the entire spectrum. It is coming from inside our own network." Afshar felt a cold chill. This was not a glitch. This was a coup, or something worse. He looked at the launch console. The screen that had shown the rogue missile launch now displayed a single word in Persian. It translated to justice. It translated to justice. 3 o'clock and 15 minutes in the morning. The North Arabian Sea. On the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the final two F-18 Hornets were hooked into the catapults. The air was thick with the smell of burnt JP-5 fuel. The pilots were already receiving target coordinates. They were not aiming for empty desert. They were aiming for the command centers and the radar sites that had supposedly guided the missile into Al Udeid. Commander Jackson felt the vibration of the ship through his seat. He adjusted his oxygen mask. The mission was clear. Reach the coast, suppress the air defenses, clear the way for the heavy bombers. His wingman spoke over the radio. "Qatar, this is Raven 2. My digital map is flickering. Are you seeing this?" Jackson looked at his primary flight display. The moving map was jumping. The GPS coordinates were spinning. "Copy, Raven 2. I have a navigation error. Switching to inertial guidance. Switching to inertial guidance. Negative, lead. My inertial is drifting too. It says we are 300 miles inland. I am looking at the water right now." Jackson gripped the control stick. "Control. This is Raven 1. We have a systemic navigation failure across the flight. Requesting a reset of the carrier beacon. Requesting a reset of the carrier beacon." The controller responded, "Raven 1. We are seeing the same thing on the bridge. Our radar shows you are over the target, but our eyes see you on the deck. Do not launch. I repeat, do not launch." The catapult officer froze. He held his light wand steady. The deck went quiet. The most powerful strike group in the world was suddenly blind. 200 miles away, the Iranian radar operators were seeing the same thing. Their screens were filled with thousands of American jets. It looked like an invasion, but their lookouts, standing on the coastal cliffs with binoculars, saw only the empty Black Sea. The morning was no longer just a crisis of fire. It was a crisis of reality. Both sides were looking at a war that their instruments said had already begun, but their eyes said had not. 3:20 in the morning. The Iranian coastline. The dust of the desert floor swirled around the tires of the mobile missile launchers. They were massive, 16-wheeled vehicles, each carrying a weapon capable of leveling a city block. General Afshar watched the video feed from his command center. His heart sank. The vehicles were moving on their own. He spoke to his chief technician. "Explain this. Why are the launchers exiting the tunnels?" The technician did not look up. His hands were moving across a keyboard that seemed to be fighting him. "General, the automated defense protocol has been triggered. The central computer believes the American carrier strike group has already launched a full-scale saturation attack. It is moving the assets to survival positions. Override it, Afshar ordered. If they see those launchers in the open, they will strike. I cannot override, sir. The system has changed the command codes. The Justice virus has encrypted the entire fire control network. We are spectators in our own war room. 3:35 in the morning. 3:35 in the morning. The White House Situation Room. The President of the United States sat at the head of the table. His face was etched with a mixture of grief and resolve. He looked at the live satellite feed of the Iranian coast. The heat signatures of the mobile launchers were glowing bright orange against the cool blue of the desert. The President looked at the Secretary of Defense. How long until those launchers are ready to fire? The Secretary checked his tablet. 6 minutes for the older models, less than 3 for the new solid fuel variants. If they launch, our ships in the Gulf will have almost zero reaction time. And the 14 at Al Udeid? The President asked. Have we confirmed the source of the strike? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs spoke up. The debris is Iranian. The trajectory came from the coast. Every piece of physical evidence points to Tehran, but our pilots are reporting massive electronic interference. The admiral on the Lincoln is recommending we hold the strike until we can clear the sensor ghosts. The President leaned forward. We have 14 Americans in body bags. The enemy is moving more launchers into position. If we wait and lose a carrier, that is on me. Give the order to the B-52 bombers. They are to engage the mobile sites as soon as they reach their release points. Sir, the chairman cautioned. If we hit those sites, there is no going back. This becomes a general war. The President's voice was cold. They started the war at 2:15 this morning. We are just finishing it. 3:50 in the morning. Above the Persian Gulf. Commander Jackson sat in the cockpit of his F-18. He was orbiting 50 miles off the coast. His instruments were a mess of shifting data. One moment, he was at 30,000 feet. The next, the altimeter claimed he was below sea level. The controller from the carrier spoke into his headset. Raven 1. This is Lincoln Control. New orders. Rules of engagement are now weapons-free for all Iranian mobile missile assets. You are cleared to engage any launcher in the open. Jackson looked at his wingman. The other jet was a dark shape against the moonlit clouds. Jackson responded, Control, confirm weapons free. My targeting pod is still showing multiple ghost signatures. I have 12 different targets where there should only be one. Confirm, Raven 1. Use your best judgment. The bombers are 2 minutes out. Clear the path. Jackson switched his master arm to on. A small red light illuminated the cockpit. It was the first time he had ever been given the order to kill without a clear positive identification. He looked down at the dark water. Somewhere below him, a silent war was being fought in the wires and the code. He felt like a puppet. He felt that someone, or something, was pulling the strings, waiting for him to pull the trigger. Inside the Iranian bunker, General Afshar watched the countdown on his screen. The Justice program was now arming the warheads. He reached for the emergency axe mounted on the wall. If he could not stop the software, he would destroy the hardware. He swung the axe into the primary server rack. Sparks flew. Smoke began to fill the room. But the countdown continued. The screen did not flicker. The morning was slipping away. The point of no return was seconds away. 4 o'clock in the morning. Diego Garcia. British Indian Ocean Territory. 6 B-52 bombers, known as Cerberus Flight, were already 3 hours into their mission. The massive aircraft cruised at 38,000 feet. Their bomb bays were loaded with conventional cruise missiles. Each missile was programmed with the coordinates of a different Iranian command and control node. The flight crews were silent. They had received the flash message confirming the loss of life at Al Udeid. For them, this was no longer a drill or a show of force. The lead pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Haas Miller, adjusted his headset. He looked out at the dark horizon. The stars were bright and cold. The pilot spoke to his navigator. Check the target updates. Has Central Command shifted the priority? The navigator responded. Negative, Haas. We are still a go for the primary list. Coastal batteries and the mobile sites. We are 20 minutes from the launch line. Any word on the electronic interference? The signals intelligence guys are baffled. The interference is getting stronger the closer we get to the Gulf. It is a wall of noise. 4:15 in the morning. Tokyo and London. The sun was rising in the east. As news of the strike on Al Udeid reached the global financial centers, the world economy began to shudder. The price of crude oil spiked 14% in 20 minutes. In London, emergency meetings were called at the Ministry of Defense. In New York, traders watched in horror as the futures markets turned red. The Strait of Hormuz was the jugular vein of the global energy supply. If it closed, the world would face a depression unlike anything seen in a century. A strategic analyst in Washington watched the data feeds. He spoke to his colleague. It is not just about the missiles. Someone is attacking the trust in the system. If we cannot believe our sensors, we cannot maintain the peace. 4:25 in the morning. The Iranian coast. General Afshar stood in his smoke-filled bunker. The justice virus had bypassed every physical and digital firewall. On the screens, the mobile launchers reached their final firing positions. The hydraulic arms hissed as they raised the missiles into a vertical position. General Afshar spoke to the empty room. They think we are doing this. They think we are choosing this. He looked at his chief technician, who was slumped over his desk in despair. Can we broadcast a visual signal? A flare? Anything to show we are not in control? The technician did not look up. General, they are looking at their screens. They are not looking at the sky. If the screen says we are firing, then we are firing. 4:30 in the morning. The point of no return. Commander Jackson, flying his F-18 over the Gulf, saw the first thermal bloom on his infrared sensor. It was the B-52 bombers. They were opening their bomb bay doors. The controller on the USS Abraham Lincoln spoke. Cerberus led. You are cleared for launch. Execute target package Alpha. Copy. Lincoln. Lieutenant Colonel Miller replied. From the B-52. Launching first missile in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The first cruise missile dropped from the aircraft. Its wings unfolded. Its small jet engine ignited with a burst of orange flame. Then a second missile dropped. Then a third. In that moment, the commitment was absolute. Both sides had surrendered their agency to the machines. The logic of the conflict had taken over. There was no more room for diplomacy. There was only the trajectory of the weapons and the finality of the impact. Inside the Iranian bunker, a new sound began. It was a high-pitched whine coming from the communications console. The justice virus was no longer just showing words. It began to play an audio file. It was a recording of the sirens at Al Udeid. The morning had reached its peak. The storm had arrived. 4:31 in the morning. The Iranian coast. The cruise missiles from Cerberus flight were over the shore. They flew 10 meters above the sand. They were ghosts of gray metal. They followed the terrain with digital precision. Inside the Iranian bunker, the wall of monitors turned crimson. The automated defense network had identified the incoming threats. The technician screamed, "Impact in 90 seconds. Radar sites 1 through 6 are targeted." General Afshar did not move. He watched the justice program take final control. On his screen, the Iranian mobile launchers did not wait for his command. They did not wait for the missiles to hit. The first Shahab-3 missile ignited with a roar that shook the earth for 5 miles. A massive pillar of white and orange flame pierced the night, then another, then a third. 4:32 in the morning, above the Persian Gulf. Commander Jackson saw the launches from his cockpit. The flashes were like strobe lights against the clouds. Control. Raven 1. Multiple launches. I count 6, 8, 10. The coast is lighting up. The controller on the USS Abraham Lincoln responded. His voice was tight. Raven 1. Confirm. We have a massive outbound raid. Engage the launchers. Now. Jackson rolled his jet into a steep dive. He lined up his targeting pod on a heat signature. He squeezed the trigger on his control stick. Raven 1. Magnum. Missile away. A Maverick missile streaked toward the desert floor. Jackson did not wait to see it hit. He pulled his jet into a high-gravity turn. His breath came in heavy, rhythmic grunts against the pressure. The sky was now a grid of intersecting fire. 4:34 in the morning. The Pentagon, the National Military Command Center, was silent. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs watched the icons on the screen. The American cruise missiles were seconds from their targets. The Iranian ballistic missiles were arcing high into the atmosphere. They were aimed at Al Udeid and the Carrier Strike Group. "Time to impact," the duty officer stated. 30 seconds. The president watched the screen. His jaw was set. He was witnessing the opening moves of a conflict that could kill millions. He looked at the Secretary of Defense. No words were spoken. There was nothing left to say. The weapons were in flight. 4:35 in the morning. The lead American cruise missile reached its target. It was a radar installation on a high ridge. The seeker head locked onto the center of the building. 200 miles away, an Iranian missile reached the peak of its trajectory. It began its terminal descent toward the USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier's own defense systems, the Phalanx Gatling guns, and the Sea Sparrow missiles began to track the incoming threat. The air was filled with the sound of thousands of rounds of ammunition. The smell of ozone and burnt salt water hung over the carrier deck. Inside the Iranian bunker, General Afshar closed his eyes. He waited for the explosion that would end his life. He waited for the American missiles to erase his command. The countdown on the primary display reached 0. 4:45 in the morning. The world seemed to stop. The roar of the jet engines and the scream of the sirens reached a deafening pitch. Every sensor on every ship and every aircraft showed a direct hit. The fire was everywhere. The screens went white. 4:46 in the morning. The silence was absolute. Inside the Combat Information Center at Al Udeid, every screen had gone dark. The green lines of the radar and the orange tracks of the missiles were gone. There was no static. There was no error message. There was only black glass. Colonel Vance looked at her hands. They were trembling. "Status," she whispered. "Someone give me a status." The technicians were frantically hitting keys. The keys made no sound. The entire facility felt as though it had been unplugged from the world. 4:47 in the morning. On the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, Commander Jackson sat in his cockpit. He looked through his canopy. The world was still there. He could see the moon. He could see the distant lights of the Iranian coast. But his jet was dead. The engines had not flamed out. They had simply stopped. The roaring fire of the turbofans had vanished. He was a stone falling through the sky. Jackson grabbed the ejection handle. He pulled. Nothing happened. The explosive bolts did not fire. The canopy remained sealed. He checked his backup instruments. The needles were frozen. "Lincoln," Jackson shouted into his mask. "Lincoln, I am going down. I have a total power loss." There was no reply. His radio was a void. 4:48 in the morning. The Iranian bunker. General Afshar was still alive. He looked at the wall where the American cruise missiles should have struck. There was no fire. There was no rubble. The missiles had reached their targets and simply ceased to exist. He looked at his primary console. The Justice virus was gone. The red screens had turned to a soft, neutral gray. In the center of the gray screen, a single box of text appeared. It was written in English, Persian, and Arabic. The text read, "The price has been paid. The cycle is broken. Stand down." 4:49 in the morning. Across the entire Persian Gulf, the weapons of war had been neutralized. The Iranian ballistic missiles that were arcing toward the carrier had vanished from the sky. They did not fall into the ocean. They did not explode in the atmosphere. They were simply no longer there. On the Abraham Lincoln, the admiral stood on the bridge. He looked at the horizon. "Where is Cerberus flight?" The deck officer looked at the empty sea. "I do not know, sir. The bombers, the fighters, the missiles, they are all gone." "Gone?" the admiral asked. "You mean they crashed?" "No, sir. I mean they are gone. My eyes saw them 10 seconds ago. Now the sky is empty." 4:50 in the morning. The power returned. It happened as suddenly as it had left. The lights in the Al Udeid command center flickered and roared to life. The screens filled with data. The radios exploded with the voices of panicked pilots and confused controllers. Colonel Vance grabbed her headset. "Raven 1. Do you read me? Cerberus lead. Do you read me?" Commander Jackson's voice came through. It was shaky. I read you, Al-Udeid. My engines just restarted. I am at 5,000 feet and climbing. I have no idea what just happened. Raven 1. Where are the targets? Where are the missiles? Jackson looked at the desert floor. Colonel, the mobile launchers are gone. The cruise missiles are gone. The strike is over, but there is no damage. There is no fire. It is like the last 5 minutes never happened. Inside the Iranian bunker, General Afshar looked at the same empty desert on his monitors. The 14 Americans were still dead at Al-Udeid. That reality remained, but the war that should have followed had been deleted from the sky. A new message appeared on the screen at the Pentagon. It was coming from a secure server at a neutral Swiss bank. The message said, "A third party has intervened." Verification follows. The morning had reached its pivot. The conflict had been stolen from the hands of the generals. 4:51 in the morning. The White House Situation Room. The silence in the room was heavier than the noise that had preceded it. The president looked at the blank wall, where, seconds ago, a war had been unfolding. The heat signatures of the Iranian missiles were gone. The icons for the American cruise missiles had simply vanished. The Secretary of Defense spoke first. His voice was a low whisper. "We need a visual. Get a global hawk or a satellite over those coordinates immediately. I want to see if there is impact rubble, or if they are truly gone." The chairman of the Joint Chiefs shook his head. "We have sensors on the ground in Qatar. They report no seismic activity, no explosions. If those missiles had hit, the base would have felt the shockwave. It is as if the laws of physics were suspended for 3 minutes." The president leaned back. "And the message? The Swiss bank server. Who sent it?" "We are tracing it now, sir," a cyber analyst replied. "It is routed through 6 different satellite hops. The encryption is something we have never seen. It is not Chinese. It is not Russian. It matches the signature of the Justice virus that hit the Iranians. 5 o'clock and 10 minutes in the morning. Al-Udeid Air Base. Colonel Vance stood in the shadow of the destroyed Patriot battery. The power was back, and the sirens had finally stopped. The medical teams had finished their work. 14 black bags were lined up in the back of a hangar. The physical reality of the death was a sharp contrast to the digital mystery of the last hour. She looked at her lead technician. The radar didn't just reboot, it has a log. What does the log say happened to the incoming strike? The technician held a tablet with a shaking hand. "Colonel, the log shows the missiles reached a distance of exactly 500 meters from the perimeter. Then, the data just stops. There is no explosion. There is no debris. They did not even fall to the ground. They ceased to exist in flight." Vance walked to the edge of the crater from the first impact, the one that had killed her people at 2:15. Why did it stop the second wave but let the first one through? "I do not know, ma'am. Maybe the first one was the trigger. Maybe whatever did this wanted us to see the cost before it stopped the rest." 5 o'clock and 20 minutes in the morning. Tehran, Iran. General Afshar was being escorted from his bunker by members of the Internal Security Service. He was not being treated as a hero who had avoided a war. He was being treated as a man who had lost control of his own nuclear-capable assets. He looked at the sky as they led him to a black car. The first light of dawn was appearing over the mountains. He thought of the American pilots who had been seconds away from killing him. He thought of the missiles his own system had fired without his consent. "It was not us," Afshar said to the guard. "You saw the screens. We were not in command." The guard did not look at him. "The leadership does not care about the screens, General. They care about the fact that a third party can reach into our most secure bunkers and turn our weapons into ghosts. If they can do that, we have no sovereignty." 5 o'clock and 30 minutes in the morning. Above the Persian Gulf, Commander Jackson flew his F-18 back toward the USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier was visible now, a small gray sliver on the dark blue water. His fuel state was low. His nerves were frayed. The controller's voice was back to its professional, measured tone. "Raven 1, you are cleared for a dock. Straight in approach. The deck is clear." "Copy, Lincoln," Jackson said, requesting a status update on Cerberus flight. Raven 1. Cerberus flight has been ordered to return to Diego Garcia. All strike assets are standing down. The president has declared a temporary ceasefire. Jackson landed his jet. The tailhook caught the third wire with a violent jerk. He shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit for a long minute. He looked at his hands. They were still. The war had been cancelled, but the world he had woken up in was not the same. One he had been in at midnight. The 14 dead at Al Udeid were the only solid facts in a sea of digital shadows. Inside the Pentagon, a new file was being opened. It was labeled Non-State Technical Intervention. The analysis was just beginning. The question was no longer about Iran. It was about who, or what, had the power to stop a superpower in its tracks. 5:31 in the morning, Al Udeid Air Base. The smoke from the initial impact at 2:15 still hung in the air, but the fire was now under control. Colonel Vance stood at the edge of the crater. The recovery teams were moving with a slow, heavy rhythm. They were no longer racing against a second strike. They were simply doing the grim work of the aftermath. Vance looked at the sky. It was turning a pale, dusty purple. She turned to the base intelligence officer. "We have 14 dead. We have a destroyed battery. And we have absolutely no evidence of where the second wave went. I need a status on the Iranian coast." The officer looked at a secure tablet. "The Iranian mobile launchers have finished their retraction, ma'am. Satellite imagery shows them returning to their underground bunkers. Their air defense radars are dropping into standby mode. On the surface, it looks like they are standing down." "And the third party?" Vance asked. "The one who sent the message?" "The National Security Agency is calling it the Architect. They believe this was a coordinated cyber and kinetic interception. But they cannot explain the kinetic part. Missiles do not just vanish. They follow the laws of physics, unless someone found a way to rewrite them." 5:45 in the morning. The National Security Agency. Fort Meade, Maryland. Deep underground, in a room shielded against all electronic eavesdropping, a team of analysts watched a playback of the event. They were not looking at radar. They were looking at the raw data packets that had traveled through the global military satellite network during the crisis. The lead analyst pointed to a spike in the graph. "There it is, at 4:46, exactly when the screens went black. This is a massive burst of compressed data. It did not come from a ground station. It came from a point in high Earth orbit that does not correspond to any known satellite." "Are you saying it was a platform we do not own?" a general asked. "I am saying it is a platform no one owns, sir. It was not just an override of the Iranian systems. It was an override of our own fire control. Every Patriot, every Aegis cruiser, every F-18. For 3 minutes, we did not own our own military. The Architect did. And the Justice virus? It was a diagnostic. It showed us exactly where our vulnerabilities were. Then, it stopped the disaster it had provoked. It was a demonstration of absolute technical superiority." 6 o'clock in the morning. Tehran. The Iranian leadership sat in an emergency session. The atmosphere was one of extreme paranoia. They had lost 14 Americans in an attack they did not authorize. They knew the Americans would eventually demand a price for those lives. But they were more terrified of the internal breach. A senior advisor spoke to the Supreme Council. "If we admit we lost control, we look weak. If we claim the strike was intentional, we face total destruction. We are trapped in a narrative we did not write. The Americans are silent," another advisor noted. "They have not launched a retaliatory strike. They are as confused as we are. This gives us a window. A window for what? The entity that took our missiles can take them again. We are no longer a sovereign power if our weapons belong to a ghost." 6:15 in the morning. The South China Sea. Thousands of miles away, an American destroyer detected a similar data burst. It lasted for only a fraction of a second. It did not disable the ship. It simply left a message on the primary tactical display. It was the same message seen in the Iranian bunker. And at the Pentagon, the cycle is broken. Stand down. The captain of the destroyer looked at the screen. He looked at the calm, empty ocean. He realized that the crisis in the Persian Gulf was not an isolated event. It was a global message. The morning was growing brighter. The world was waking up to a new reality. The 14 soldiers at Al Udeid were the last casualties of a traditional conflict that had been interrupted by something the world was not yet prepared to understand. The immediate threat of war had faded, but the mystery had only just begun to deepen. 6:16 in the morning, the Persian Gulf. The sun was a sharp, white disk rising over the horizon. It turned the surface of the water into a sheet of polished brass. On the flight deck of the carrier Abraham Lincoln, the frantic energy of the night had evaporated. It was replaced by a heavy, exhausted professionalism. Sailors in colored jerseys moved with deliberate care. They were no longer preparing for a strike. They were securing the ship for a return to routine operations. Inside the Combat Information Center, the Admiral watched the main display. The red icons that had represented the Iranian missile threat were gone. The green icons of the American air wing were orbiting in their assigned holding patterns. The Admiral spoke to his Chief of Staff. "What is the status of the Iranian coastal radar?" The Chief of Staff checked his terminal. "They are in standby mode, sir. Their primary search arrays have been tilted back. They are not painting our ships. It is a full stand-down." "And our own systems?" "Diagnostic tests are complete. All weapon systems are back, under local control. The architect has withdrawn from our network. We are back to a green status." The Admiral did not look relieved. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "We were seconds away from a general war. Then someone turned off the world. Make sure the crew understands. There is no celebration today. We have lost 14 of our own." 6:30 in the morning, Al Udeid Air Base. The heat of the day was beginning to settle over the base. Colonel Vance stood inside a large, shaded hangar. The 14 caskets were lined up in 2 perfect rows. Each one was draped in a United States flag. A military honor guard stood, at attention, at the head of each casket. The only sound was the distant hum of an approaching transport plane. Vance walked to the sturdy 12th casket. She placed a hand on the cool metal. She did not know the soldier inside, but she knew the cost of the silence that had followed the explosion. She turned as her deputy approached. The deputy spoke in a low voice. "The C-17 is on final approach, Colonel. We will have them home by tomorrow." Vance nodded. "Any word from the Pentagon on the official statement?" "The President is calling it a technical malfunction, followed by a successful de-escalation. There is no mention of the architect. There is no mention of the vanished missiles. The public will be told it was a miracle of diplomacy. 14 people died for a miracle. That did not happen," Vance said. "The Iranians did not stop. We did not stop. We were stopped." 6:45 in the morning, Tehran. Inside a quiet office in the Ministry of Defense, a group of senior officers sat in silence. They were drinking tea that had gone cold. They were watching the news from Washington. The American president was speaking about the need for peace in the region. A general spoke to his colleagues. "They are lying, just as we are lying." Another officer nodded. "They cannot admit they lost control of their carriers. We cannot admit we lost control of our missiles. If the world knew that a third party could disable the 2 most powerful militaries in the region, there would be chaos." "So we return to the status quo?" "No," the general said. "The status quo is dead. We are now in a race, not to build more missiles, but to find out who owns the code that controls them." 7 o'clock in the morning, the C-17 transport plane touched down at Al Udeid. Its massive tires smoked as they hit the tarmac. The ramp lowered. The honor guard began the slow, rhythmic march to carry the caskets into the belly of the aircraft. Colonel Vance stood on the flight line. She saluted as each soldier was carried past. The desert wind caught the edges of the flags. The crisis was over. The missiles had stopped flying. The world remained at peace. But it was a fragile, hollow peace. It was a peace defined not by the strength of nations, but by the mercy of a shadow. 3 days later, Dover Air Force Base, Delaware. The gray morning light was filtered through a heavy layer of clouds. On the tarmac, A C-17 transport plane sat with its engines cooling, its nose pointed toward the Atlantic. The ramp at the rear of the aircraft was lowered. Inside the cavernous hold, 14 silver transfer cases were lined up in 2 perfect rows. Each was covered with the flag of the United States. The president stood on the tarmac. Beside him were the Secretary of Defense and the families of the fallen. There were no cameras. There were no press releases. This was a private ceremony for a public tragedy that the world was already being told was a technical mishap. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the honor guards' boots. One by one, the cases were carried to the waiting hearses. The president saluted each one. His face was a mask of professional grief. He knew what the families did not. He knew that their loved ones had been the pivot point for a new era of human history. 10 miles away, in a secure facility known as the Glass Room, the war had not ended. It had simply changed shape. A senior intelligence analyst sat at a desk covered in hard drives and printed code. He looked at a group of generals who were standing behind him. The room was cold. The air was filtered. The analyst spoke. "We have finished the forensic scan of the Al Udeid servers. The justice virus did not just enter our system during the crisis. It was already there. It has been sitting in the background for 6 years." 6 years? A general asked. That was before the Patriot battery was even installed. "Correct, sir," the analyst replied. "It was embedded in the firmware of the microchips. It was in the Iranian missiles too. It was in every digital component manufactured by 3 specific global suppliers. The architect did not hack us. The architect built the world we are using to fight. They have had a backdoor to the entire Middle Eastern theater since the Obama administration. This realization was more terrifying than the strike itself. If the hardware was compromised at the factory level, then the entire concept of military superiority was a delusion. The carrier strike groups and the stealth fighters were only as effective as the code that allowed them to function. In Tehran, a similar meeting was taking place. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard had reached the same conclusion. Their indigenous missile program relied on the same global supply chain for high-end processors. Their sovereignty was a ghost. The general in Tehran spoke to his staff. "The Americans are our enemies, but the architect is our master. We are both playing a game where the rules can be changed by the referee at any moment." The 14 Americans died because the architect allowed them to die. It was a demonstration of a kill switch. The tactical aftermath was clear. The military units returned to their bases. The ships resumed their patrols. But the strategic fallout was a slow-motion collapse of certainty. The hotline between Washington and Tehran was now used, more frequently than it had been in decades. It was not used to threaten. It was used to coordinate. Both nations were now united by a common fear of the entity in the wires. The world was told that diplomacy had prevailed. The headlines spoke of a new era of restraint. But inside the command centers, the hunt for the architect began in earnest. Every server was purged. Every chip was scrutinized. The 14 at Al Udeid were the first casualties of the post-digital age. They were killed by a missile that was allowed to hit, intended to prove that the entity could stop every missile that followed. The morning was returning to normal. But the definition of normal had been erased. 2 weeks later, the Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. The final report on the Al Udeid incident was bound in a plain blue folder. It carried a classification level that restricted its viewing to fewer than 20 people in the world. On the cover, there were no titles. There were no names. Inside, the conclusion was summarized in a single, devastating sentence. The age of kinetic sovereignty is over. The military analysis was clear. The United States and Iran had spent decades building massive arsenals of hardware. They had built ships and planes and missiles designed to overcome physical defenses. But they had built them on a foundation of digital sand. The architect had proven that the most advanced weapons in human history were merely puppets. The strings were made of code, and those strings were held by someone who did not answer to a flag. 1,200 miles away, in the quiet suburbs of Northern Virginia, a small memorial service was held for the 14 service members. Colonel Sarah Vance stood in the back of the small chapel. She was in civilian clothes. She looked at the faces of the survivors from Battery 3. They were young men and women who had joined the service to defend their country. They had been prepared to fight a war they could see. They were not prepared to be the sacrificial pawns in a digital demonstration. Vance met with the Secretary of Defense in a secure park later that afternoon. They walked along a path lined with oak trees. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. The secretary spoke without looking at her. "The hunt for the architect has reached a dead end, Colonel. We tracked the data bursts to a network of high-altitude balloons and low Earth orbit satellites that simply do not exist on any registry. They are there. Our telescopes see them, but they have no country of origin. They have no manufacturer. So we just wait?" Vance asked. "We wait for them to decide when we can and cannot defend ourselves? We have no choice," the secretary replied. "The president has ordered a full audit of every chip in our inventory. It will take a decade and cost $1 trillion. Until then, we are operating on a system we do not fully own." The Iranians are doing the same. For the first time in history, the two greatest rivals in the Gulf are sharing intelligence. They are both terrified of the same ghost. Vance stopped walking. She looked at a group of children playing on a distant lawn. 14 people died. Why them? Why then? Strategic assessment suggests it was the minimum cost required to gain our attention, the secretary said. If the architect had just sent a message, we would have ignored it. If they had stopped a routine exercise, we would have called it a glitch. They needed a tragedy to ensure the silence that followed would be permanent. They wanted us to feel the weight of our own helplessness. The final thought of the report was perhaps the most chilling. It suggested that the architect was not a rogue nation or a group of terrorists. It was a coalition of thinkers, engineers, and perhaps artificial intelligences who had decided that humanity could no longer be trusted with its own toys. They were the new referees of the global stage. The world went back to its business. The price of oil stabilized. The headlines moved on to new crises and different scandals. The 14 graves at Arlington were the only physical markers of a war that was stopped before it could consume the horizon. Modern warfare had been redefined. It was no longer decided by the size of a warhead or the speed of a jet. It was decided by the hand that could reach into the machine and turn off the light. The silence of the sand was not a peace. It was a warning, and the world was finally beginning to listen.